And good morning, Hoosier Nation, and welcome to another off-season edition of Hoosier Morning After, a later than usual, a sleep-in edition of Hoosier Morning After. This is Hoosier Morning After Puerto Rico. This is an episode to give a chance to kind of catch up where we last left off, and we'll have a special guest that's going to be popping on with us later. Zach Ostermann from the Indy Star is going to join, who was out there at Puerto Rico. But this is a great chance to kind of look back at the great opportunity that Indiana had. Obviously, every 4 years, universities are able to take these international trips and play teams, international teams, get together a few games. But the obviously big thing for the coaching staff that they enjoy from that is it affords you 10 extra practices to get your guys together, especially in a situation where you're turning over completely a team and a complete coaching staff. All practices that you can get are invaluable. And so obviously that was a big thing leading up to that for these guys. And then just a chance to get together and bond as teammates outside of the university, outside of the daily routine, outside of your comfort zone, because you really kind of find out a little bit more about people when you're kind of doing things that may be different from your daily routines. And then playing 3 games, seeing different faces across the court to yourself. And was very interesting 3 games overall. Obviously, if most of you know kind of how things went, but just an overall broad terms of it, the first game that IU played was a bit of a pushover game, bit of a game that IU handled the whole entire time. IU was the larger team in that one size-wise, something that we're not going to see as the season goes on, and handled it very well, a routing of sorts. And then the last 2 games, really the invaluable situation, as Indiana got punched in the mouth in both games and had comeback wins, something that we haven't seen in the past. Hoosiers be able to tackle those hits down low, getting down as much as 20 and coming back in both of these games very handily. So very, very great kind of structure. You don't want to kind of go out and have these games and blow out both situations. Being tested early is a great situation. And there's lots of different nitpicky things that we'll kind of get into as we go along in this show. But just a fun thing to bookmark us and get us going and sort of wet our whistles as we get ready for football season, and then a very exciting basketball season coming on after that. Thank you for being here with us. With me always is Martha, the mop lady. Martha, just kind of some opening thoughts on the Puerto Rico trip for IU.
Yeah, it's August and it's exciting because you and I usually don't get to sit down and talk in August. So I think that's the excitement. Point number 1 for me is just getting a chance to chat with you a little bit early this year, and obviously the unique aspect for me, with this trip, and obviously everything that's led up to the point of the trip is obviously the new regime, and then throwing a completely new roster together in a way that I think is new for a lot of us IU fans, right? With the portal and NIL and all that stuff, the way you can, you think back to when Tom Crean took over the program and how he had to construct his roster and how much it's so different now. And it was really kind of a speed dating version of putting together a roster. So, on paper, we saw a lot of good things, but it's like, what does all this mean? What does all this mean? And in a typical year, you're waiting until October, November, to start seeing guys on the court a little bit more. So I think that it was perfect timing, right, for a new staff, a completely new roster, one that hasn't spent a lot of time together. I think it was an invaluable trip, both from getting experience on the court. And then obviously you saw Coach DeVries and a lot of the media talk about what it meant for the team off the court to spend some time together off campus and get to know each other. So leading up to it, I was really excited just to see, didn't really know what to expect. You really don't know a whole lot about the competition. You read up what you can, but just really, really excited to see how they gelled on the court, what the style was, how the guys were going to be used. And obviously I know we'll get into kind of game by game. And once Zach joins us, get his fresh perspective from being down there. But obviously coming out of it, just really, really, you and I were talking about how and it's tough you got to stay level headed about it, but just the excitement that you leave with it. So yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I'm glad they went through some of the things they went through both on the court and off the court. So excited to get into it with you.
Yeah, and he just joined backstage, so we'll bring him out to us. But Zach Ostermann is our special guest, brand new on the show, new guest to the show. He is a writer at the Indy Star. So great articles. If you follow anything IU athletics-wise, you've definitely read some things, seen some things from him and everything. He had the benefit of being out there for these games and some great coverage. Obviously, as always, to see that. And he doesn't look too sunburnt as well from that trip. Looks pretty good. Zach, I was going to try to find and download that great trumpet charge sound that they were playing in the arena as your intro. Figured you were probably felt pretty comfortable with that. But thank you for being on the show, and great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm still kind of recovering from seven nights away in a hotel is taxing after a while, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I think let's start off just overall. Give us your kind of just broad strokes on the trip, how you thought things went and the structure. I kind of said earlier, I think things lined up pretty well with the games. You had an easy game, and then you had two ones that you had to battle there. How do you think Indiana kind of handled this trip overall?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say up front is like there are a couple things kind of for people to keep in mind. Number one, the foreign tours are never just about the games. And I know it's funny to call it a foreign tour because they didn't actually leave the United States, but you know, the preseason tour, if you want to call it that, they're never just about the games. You know, if anything, I think probably the most valuable piece of it for Indiana this year will have been the practices and you know, basically double the amount of time that they can practice as a team in the summer. And the fact that if memory serves on the rules, you normally can't even have your whole team on the floor together with your coaches. They can be on the floor in like open gyms and stuff, but not in coaching settings. But you can when you have the 10 allowed practices to build up to the trip, you can have your whole team on the floor all at one time. Number two, everybody's in their preseason. So like, you know, mega super bets, what they're called. But I think that the consistent sort of like term is mega. They're in their preseason as well. My understanding was I think lost 5 players to college last year. So like they had a pretty heavily turned over roster too. And then the third thing to remember is these games are played on international rules, which the biggest sort of structural difference there is going to be the 24-second shot clock. And the fact that just generally the games are going to be played faster. You're going to see higher scores typically, not always, but you know, it's just the complexion of the game is going to be different. I think Indiana looked good. I didn't come out of there thinking, oh my God, that's a 28-win team. You know, certainly I think we all, you know, are justifiably focusing mostly on the 2 games with Mega. Nothing against Central Universidad de Bayamón, but that was not really a contest, nor was it ever supposed to be one. You know, I think there were certainly some player by player things that were interesting that we can get into. I think probably in the broad strokes, you know, we all suspected Indiana might be further ahead offensively than defensively, and I think we saw that. I think everyone, you know, I think it probably reinforced what we all sort of suspected about this roster, that it's going to have to learn to play up a little bit size-wise. It's not the biggest roster in the world. You know, I think Indiana's got to get healthier, and that sounds simplistic, but you could see some depth issues. And again, you know, the foul issues that Indiana had in a couple of these games, I think were a little bit down to not really appreciating the differences in the way the game is called at the international level, at the FIBA level, not really understanding certain things were going to be allowed, you know, particularly screening was really quite something. But then that you know, certain contact, especially defensively, was not going to be allowed. But you could still see, like, all it took was, you know, like one guard getting into foul trouble, and suddenly that guard rotation looked really, really thin. So, you know, I think in all, I suspect if he were here, Darren DeVries would say it was a successful trip. I think he probably will have, as you said there, liked seeing his team challenged and liked seeing his team respond to that challenge. And I think he'll probably feel like, he's got a lot of good film to chew on, going back. Because I think that's probably the most valuable thing after the tour for coaches, is just that they have film to watch of their team and their players, against a live opponent that they can break down all through August and September while they prepare for their preseason. But I also think DeVries would probably tell you too that, the benefit for his team was far more than just the games, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And now I do want to get some caveats out of the way. Obviously, like Zach just said, these are preseason games, so we're not going to draw too much craziness from this because it's very different once we get into the season. And obviously, as well, as I mentioned to Martha before we went live, any sort of this is going to be the tightrope that we walk this year when talking about Indiana basketball. Any sort of similarities or comparisons that we draw from past coaching staffs or anything like that does not mean to disparage them at all in any way. It's just the way we do things. We compare things how they were familiar back with us. And then also, just to save Zach as well, I did not send him a run sheet. I did not send him a load of questions. So he's shooting from the hip on this completely. One thing that you did mention there that I wanted to see if you had any other things that you noticed was you talked about the off the court stuff. Now, IU always does a great job with the different videos of the different trips that they did. They'd had the camp with the kids, that kind of thing. One thing we didn't really see, and I saw a few comments about, was IU warming up a little bit differently. How did you see their warm-ups go differently in this? And then also, just from being someone who's sat at a lot of IU basketball games and seen warm-ups, seen how players interact, what did you see out of this team interaction-wise, how they're getting along off the court?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we didn't spend a lot of that time was just kind of like reserved for the team. The one thing I got to tag along to was the skills clinic, the kids camp. I don't think I'm breaking down the fourth wall too much here when I say, though, that again, I think some of that stuff will have been as important to DeVries as the games. I mean, to the extent that I think there were team outings on game days. So, Indiana wasn't not trying to win the games, but they really weren't the only focus of the trip. And so when you saw maybe slow starts and things, that's certainly something DeVries is going to want to work on. To be honest, they probably started kind of slowly against Bayamon too, but you also have to contextualize that with the fact that, they didn't it was, I thought it was pretty clear, for example, that Mega took the day off between games to kind of adjust to certain things, probably practiced, sort of like, I don't know if they watched film, but they clearly sort of adjusted to the way they were defending some of what Indiana was doing. I think Indiana spent the day between games, at the beach or jet skiing or something like that. Like that was, Indiana was there for that stuff just as much as it was there for the games themselves, because DeVries, I think, really wanted to prioritize the idea of this team growing closer. And Obviously that can happen on the court, and I think it did. But there's also, especially when, as you were talking about there, kind of when I came in, this roster coming together in such a short space of time, you don't have the natural sort of organic, opportunities to grow and to bond. I mean, remember, these guys spend a lot of time together, but you're talking about like 22, 23, 24-year-olds, some of them have families, some of them quite literally, I know we all like fondly remember, midnight hangs in college, but some of them are only going to be in Bloomington for a few months. Some of them have, kids or other commitments or whatever. It's not like they can just organically all the time be like, hey, let's go get dinner together. Let's go do this. Like you do have to be intentional about building that chemistry too. And I think that was going to be just as important to DeVries on this trip as anything else. But I think it was, it probably did show up on the floor sometimes that they weren't just there for the basketball. And listen, I'm not saying that, Mega was, doing bed checks at 8, and I'm sure they were, I'm sure they were having fun in Puerto Rico too. But it all of it is, kind of grain of salt stuff, just because everyone's trying to get something a little different out of the trip. And, for DeVries, I think purely on the basketball, I think the value for him was the practices. I think the games will really have helped. And again, I said this before, but I think the way his team had to win those games will really have helped. I think he will really have liked that. But I think purely on basketball, the practices were the thing that were kind of top of mind for him with this. And then getting them down there, I think it was a little bit team bonding, a little bit, let's get some games in, let's play somebody else. It's always refreshing to do that, because at the end of the day, these guys are basketball players. Like, they just enjoy playing basketball. And then, probably a little bit of a reward too. I mean, the thing that we never talk about with these preseason tours is, it's basically double the amount of work guys normally do in the summer. And you have to manage that, because you can't put your players in a situation where, you basically start their season 3 months early, but then just expect them to keep, just expect them to maintain that physical level all the way through March. You've got to, Indiana will have to change some of what it would normally do in terms of its August and September, sort of on-court activity, because these guys have done a lot more just physical work in June and July than they normally would. And so I think there's also that element of sort of, hey, let's reward the players too. We're going to give them this experience because they've worked hard all summer, harder than they normally would. And they've probably spent more time, away from their families than they normally would, because normally they get a little bit of time off. I know they had some time off around the 4th, I think, to go home, but it is also a little bit of a sort of, I think, let's reward these guys for, kind of putting in extra effort through the summer as well.
Nice. Yeah, obviously getting into a little bit talking about the games, with a new team, one of the biggest adjustments teams can have and not knowing each other can be the defensive end. That's going to be the biggest struggle for IU as they kind of start the season and get going. Was that kind of some of the situations that you saw that led to them being down early in the games, in those last 2 games? And then what did you see that maybe got a little bit better as the games went through on the defensive end for Indiana?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of certainly, listen, this team is going to have some issues defensively. Like, it's not an incredibly big team. It has some length, but it's not like an incredibly long team. It's not a team that is, DeVries even talked about they hadn't really worked on 5-way switching. They kind of had to audible to that in their last game. This team's going to be a work in progress defensively for a while, I think. And I don't think this is ever going to be, a top 5 defense nationally or anything like that. I think they've got enough offensive firepower to kind of score their way past some of their issues. And we saw that, especially in that Saturday game where they were down 23 and they won by 22. But I think that, there are clearly still some issues they've got to resolve defensively. Some of it's structural. The pack line is
careful. It's a dirty word in Indiana.
Well, listen, this is kind of a tangent, but this is where I always feel compelled to point out defense was never the problem under Archie Miller. Like his defenses were fine. The problem was the defenses got so stressed by Indiana's inability to score that anytime they broke down, it seemed sort of doubly problematic. But if you go look at the numbers, his teams were fine defensively. Their issue is they couldn't shoot. this team should not have any trouble shooting the ball. But the pack line is a specific kind of defense that you've got to pick up, and it takes specific kinds of communication and things. And then there's also there were going to be some communication breakdowns because, again, these guys haven't played together very much, and that's where I think you do get the value of these games. I also think, though, again, 24-second shot clock is going to change the complexion of the way you defend and, frankly, the way you attack. Indiana in both games, but especially that game on Saturday, had real issues trying to figure out early on, especially what was going to be allowed and what wasn't, especially in ball screen situations. And there were just at least a dozen times where I watched Mega set a screen action that I just thought that would never fly. And I'm not even saying that the way the Big Ten's going to call screens is better. I'm just saying that there were so many moments where Indiana broke down in part because something was allowed under the FIBA rules that just would not be called that way in college.
Are you meaning more like a moving screen situation?
Yes. Yeah. Moving screens. Basically where players are allowed to go, what space they're entitled to. I mean, listen, there were a couple times where it just looked like pass blocking, but it is probably more reflective of the NBA, where it's almost that that sort of like, as long as the player can make an argument that he's just moving into his space, he's allowed to do it. Point is, it would not. I do not believe it would be called that way in college, and so there was a little bit of that adjustment as well. And then the other part of it too was, frankly, Indiana was struggling to score. I mean, Indiana, I think, only had 12 points. I don't have the box score right in front of me, but I think they only had 12 points at the end of the first quarter on Saturday. And listen, they scored 93, so that gives you an idea of how they closed that game. 81 points in 30 minutes, but your defense, as we talked about with Archie there, your defense is always going to look worse when you're struggling to score the ball, and you are, you're starting to force things. You're taking bad shots. Those are leading to runouts and transition opportunities for the other team. So it was a little bit of a lot of things, and I don't want this to sound like I'm sugarcoating. I think Indiana's got a ways to go defensively. I think both those games were reminders that, number one, Indiana's an experienced team, and that can make up for a lot. And number two, I still think Indiana is going to be a team that can score itself out of trouble, a decent amount this year. But it was more than just, structurally Indiana's bad defensively, and that's not going to change. There were some other sort of contributing factors, some of which I suspect will not be concerns once Indiana reaches the regular season.
Now, you mentioned the screening, the moving screens, and created difficulty for them on the defensive end. Did it create bad habits for Indiana on the offensive end? Were they staying pretty true to what they're going to run into in a Big Ten standpoint as far as screens? Were they taking advantage of what was being called? What did you see on the offensive end screening-wise?
Yeah, they to be honest,
would hate for bad habits to come in for Indiana.
Yeah, I don't know that I saw. I mean, again, it is hard to know too, because I've just never seen like Darren DeVries' team. So for example, when they're playing with a 24-second clock, everything just has to move faster. He has talked about how his offense is designed to try and get a quality shot within 12 seconds. So was some of the pace that Indiana was playing with, which at times was really beneficial, and at times, they were probably playing a little too fast. Was some of that pace reflective of his style? Was it reflective of the way the game was being played because it was under international rules? I'm just not sure, because I don't have any comparison points of, watching Darren DeVries' Indiana teams against college competition. I thought, generally speaking, I thought Indiana ran some really good stuff offensively. I think, you do remember that even though these guys haven't been around each other a long time, they've been around college basketball, a lot of them, a very long time. And you've got a number of guys on this team who have either been, the alpha where they were, Lamar Wilkerson, Tucker DeVries, Tayton Connerway, Reed Bailey, or they have been, I'm thinking particularly about Connor Enright. They've been around Darren DeVries before, and Tucker DeVries as well. I think he was, even though he didn't have great scoring games out there for the most part, like he was maybe the most involved player on the floor, and it was just, you could tell because he kind of knew where the action was going to be, especially offensively. He knew like where to go find the ball, where things were supposed to go. You would expect that. He's playing for his dad. I don't know that I saw like a ton of bad habits. I think, some of it too was that Indiana had just some cold stretches shooting the ball, which again, when you're not, you asked about warmups earlier, and I think I just kind of wound up meandering around the question. Forgive me. Indiana was running a lot of like drive and kick drills during warmups and things, especially for guards and wings. Would Indiana be a little sharper shooting the ball in the regular season? Probably. Would Indiana be a little sharper shooting the ball with a college 3-point line as opposed to an international 3-point line? Probably. Again, this is where I also wonder a little bit about pace, and is that Indiana's natural pace, or was that sped up because of the nature of the game? But I don't know that I saw like bad habits offensively. I think I saw, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think I saw a team that has a lot of players that know how to score the ball, and maybe they're still figuring out how to do it together at times. Then listen, there were just times too when shots didn't go in, but I don't think that sort of that, even if the offense is something that's still going to progress in DeVries' mind, I don't think he needs to worry about the instincts of a lot of the players we're talking about, because those are players who have a lot of time on task. I mean, it sounds simplistic, but scoring the ball. And I don't, as much as I feel confident saying this, I think that group, especially kind of the top end, the starting five for all three games was Enright, Connerway, Wilkerson, DeVries, Bailey. I could see a world where once Nick Dorn is healthy, maybe he slides into one of those spots and someone goes to the bench. But that's all kind of speculation right now. That's a lineup that has a lot of scoring potential, and they've obviously got to keep growing together in their ability to sort of score the ball as a team, as a unit. But I think you could even see some of those relationships already kind of forming. DeVries and Wilkerson, I think both bigs had some really good moments. The two kind of true bigs, Bailey and Sam Alexis. This is all kind of like a really rambling way of saying I don't think Indiana's going to have a lot of trouble scoring the ball, and I don't think Indiana's going to have a ton of concerns with just disjointed offense. But I think that, again, if I do sort of critique it, the one thing I come back to is they kind of started slowly in all three games, and if you can live with that defensively, if you don't know the opponent, if you're adjusting to a different style of officiating, different sort of set of rules, Indiana needs to be a team that kind of hits the ground running offensively, I think, a lot, because that is how I think Indiana is going to control games and kind of set the terms of games this season.
Yeah, you mentioned one thing there that obviously was a big concern going into this season with the big guys that were big names at their previous school, lower majors for some of them and everything. It was going to be how they kind of step up. From what we've seen in the highlights and at least the box scores, it at least looked like they were playing relatively unselfish. They were sharing the ball well. Assist to turnover rate looked pretty good overall in these games. And then also just something that we couldn't really see from the highlights, but maybe you could see being there along with that, playing unselfish and sharing the ball. What was communication like while they were on the court? It was kind of something that lacked a little bit in past seasons with teams where they were pretty quiet, but obviously getting into a new team and a new system, communication needs to be up, and it needs to be a lot of talking on the floor. What did you see as far as that goes in these games?
Yeah, I thought just generally like offensive relationships were pretty good. I think, that like to your point, I think they shared the ball well. Again, you remember that there's a lot of guys on this team that are used to having the ball in their hands, or yes, the ball in their hands. Yes, I said that the right way a lot. And obviously everyone's going to have to give over that maybe, 10, 12%, right, of whatever they were doing at their previous stop, because now they don't need to be the leading scorer, the alpha everything. But I think you still just saw a lot of guys that were comfortable, I don't want to what is it? Correlation doesn't always equal causation or whatever, but I think it's noteworthy, for example, that it's actually 2 assists from Lamar Wilkerson that make the difference in that comeback win in their last game on Monday. Both times Wilkerson got his feet all the way into the lane, and both times he dumped the ball off. Once was just kind of a little pocket pass to Sam Alexis, and the other one was a handoff to Reed Bailey, who was cutting along the baseline for the slam dunk that eventually won the game. I don't think communication is going to be, again, you remember these guys are old, that often it's young players who don't naturally speak up, and I think these guys are, genuinely or generally, excuse me, I think these guys are, experienced enough to just kind of know how to be demonstrative, know how to communicate. That's also a point of emphasis from Indiana's bench, and Darren DeVries has talked about this. He says, we want a loud gym, we want lots of energy, we want lots of talking. And every coach can say they emphasize that, but I mean, it is different sometimes when it's a clear and present priority for a coach. And so I don't think I did not see, I guess I didn't, at least put it this way, from my vantage point, I did not see moments when it seemed like Indiana went quiet, when it seemed like Indiana went stale. Even in the offensive, even the moments where they struggled offensively, I still thought they were trying to do the right stuff. It wasn't like the ball was sticking somewhere, other than Tate and Connerway just kind of had to sort of create some solutions in the first half of their third game because nobody was making shots, and Mega had just really done well to take DeVries and Wilkerson out of the offense. And so Connerway had 18 points in that half. I think 9 of them were at the free throw line. And that was a little, that was about as individualistic as anybody got. And again, I think that was just Connerway saying somebody's got to keep us afloat right now because nothing else is working. We just got to, we got to keep our head above water. Let's get to the locker room. We'll figure it out. But, that was kind of out of necessity for the most part. I did not see moments when Indiana was again, where the ball was sticking or the offense was going stale. Or it felt like, guys were sort of being too passive, whether it was the way they were playing, the way they were communicating, whatever. I think there was good chemistry there. And again, I think there was the assertiveness of there being a lot of guys on the floor that know from previous stops how to be, that leader, how to be the guy that sort of sets the tone from the top of the food chain.
Yep. Go ahead, Martha. You had a question?
Yeah, Zach, and this is more back to a little bit of off the court stuff, and it kind of goes back to some of the things I heard coming off of the Hoosiers Connect event in French Lick, and then obviously the trip down to Puerto Rico. It seems like there's a real emphasis on coaching these guys on how to engage with fans, with just their presence off the court too. I think coming from some of these guys coming from a smaller university, Indiana basketball can obviously be a culture shock for some of these guys. And it just seems like there's a real emphasis all the way around in some of the things I've read to just have these guys engage with fans and things like that. Are you noticing that? And 1 and 2, how do you think these guys are adjusting to being Indiana basketball players?
Yeah, I mean, as much as that was noticeable, because there weren't a ton of fans there, and DeVries made a point to try and thank people. And I saw a few players go over as well. This wasn't like the 2021 foreign tour when they went to the Bahamas, because I think something like that's different because, if you go to Atlantis, everything's sort of self-contained, right? So like it's you go there and you stay in the same place where you're going to eat, where you're going to watch basketball, where everything is going to go on. And so I think there was a slightly larger sort of traveling party then. There were, I don't know, maybe 50 to 100 IU fans at the game on Saturday, and then a bunch of local fans came out too. But I think I at no point certainly did I feel like Indiana, like anyone was, sort of wide-eyed about any of it, and I think they appreciated the support, and they appreciated, there's actually a pretty fun atmosphere. I mean, there were only a few hundred people in the arena, but there was pretty fun atmosphere for that Saturday game, especially because you had a lot of local fans who just, I think, were excited to watch live basketball, and just like a lot of kids came out and stuff like that. This is the one area where I'll probably also beg off and say, ultimately, if that's going to be an issue for anyone, we're not going to know about it until the lights get really bright. If you know what I'm saying, like if that's going to be if that's going to be a problem, then it's going to be a problem when there are 17,000 people in the stands, or when campus is full and they're going to class, with 44,000, fellow students or whatever. But I certainly, to your point, a lot of guys in this group came from smaller schools. They came from, schools where probably that spotlight wasn't as bright for one reason or another. I never got a sense that anyone was sort of overawed. I never got a sense that anyone, was almost sort of like taken aback, if that makes sense. I think, that again, and I suspect this is a sort of a talking point that I'm going to find myself returning to a lot in the next few months. This is an old team. I mean, it's a very experienced team. And therefore, at least in theory, it should be a very mature team. I think, to your point, I would not be at all surprised if Darren DeVries is trying to be proactive about, building that sort of rapport with the fan base and making sure these guys are comfortable with, the stage that they're all about to sort of step out on. But, you're not talking about freshmen and sophomores. You're talking about guys that have been in college 3, 4, 5 years. And, again, I mean, there's guys on this roster who are probably already thinking about a career after basketball. There's guys on this roster who already have families. I think there's just going to be a maturity, I guess, is what I'm trying to say to this roster, that I suspect, it's going to feel young to people because it's so new, and it is young in terms of, time together, but it's not young in years, or, at the risk of getting, kind of deep thoughtsy life experience. And I think that, that will probably serve Indiana well as they move into, portions of the calendar where that attention is going to be a little bit more intense, and that, that spotlight is going to be a little bit brighter.
A few more thoughts before we close this out and I let you go. One thing you mentioned there is about the energy, and it seems like this is a team that, while obviously there wasn't many there, like you said, just about 100 IU fans that you could tell, the bench stayed engaged, stayed up and involved. All reports too that the coaching staff was up and going, even getting a bench warning as well during some of those foul calls. What did you see as far as the bench engagement, and overall too, just the coaching engagement? How were timeouts going? Were they huddling up and then getting together? What kind of things did you see that we didn't see in the highlights?
Yeah, I mean, this even goes back to, they opened a practice up the week before they went down, and I mean, it was demonstrable, like how loud it was in there, how I think DeVries said, I'm trying to remember the exact quote, but he basically said, we want a loud Jim, because we want, and it starts with him. I mean, he's a relatively sort of even-keeled, composed guy, like when he talks to us. But if you see him on the sideline, he's very competitive. And that, that sort of bleeds over into his staff. That bleeds over into, into his, sort of his roster and onto his players. I think you get the same from them. I mean, it was, they were not passive, and that's in a lot of different ways. You mentioned that sideline warning. There was a moment when Connor Enright got shouldered to the ground in the Saturday game, and I mean, he popped up and just went nose to nose with the guy who did it, who was a fair bit taller than he was. And there was, again, just, I don't know, it stuff like that doesn't feel forced. Like stuff like that does just feel like that is the sort of personality of the team, that they're not going to get pushed around. They're not going to be passive. Some of it is clearly an emphasis from the coaching staff, that we need to be loud. We need to be energetic. Guys need to be giving each other energy, pushing each other, etc. But I also think there's also just maybe some spark in the personality of this team too. That you're going to have enough guys on this team that are, just naturally sort of energetic, naturally maybe a little bit spunky. Just kind of not afraid to be more outwardly demonstrative. Again, I think it's an easy thing for a coach to say we're going to prioritize energy, but I don't think this team is naturally quiet and passive and like it's on DeVries to pull it out of them. I think a fair bit of that just comes naturally to enough of these players that, listen, some of them will be a little bit more stoic, some of them will be a little bit quieter, and that's fine. But, you don't need, 15 screamers. You always need that balance. And I think they've got enough guys that can really emphasize energy and assertiveness. And I would be surprised, again, small sample size, preseason tour, whatever. But based on what I've seen, I would be surprised if that was a problem.
Yeah. Another, obviously, that energy is going to be great. Obviously, they're going to feed off of Assembly Hall big time. And it's going to lead to possibly, which I love hearing, that DeVries is willing to stick his neck out and possibly get that tee. I have a feeling we'll see some technicals from him. He's not going to be afraid to use the technical to motivate his team and get that energy up. The next question that I want to bring up to you, and I think it kind of lead you possibly into an answer for it, but being that you've seen what you've seen, you've been into the practice and then gone out to this international trip and everything like that, was there anything that surprised you, anything that was out of the ordinary? I think from a 1,000-foot view and us watching was how quickly it appeared Trent Sicily was able to contribute and how many minutes and what he got. Obviously, caveat of preseason, all that kind of thing, exhibition game, competition, and everything like that. But what surprised you, and maybe speak on Trent's kind of games as well?
Yeah, I mean, working backward, I mean, I actually, because if you ask like just in sort of broad strokes, like what surprised me, I would go back to the practice that we got to observe. And number one on Sicily, from that moment forward, I don't think he's going to score 15 points a game this year, but he's never looked on a team that has very few freshmen. He's never looked out of place. He has never looked like, and we've seen him in a practice in 3 games now. He's never looked like somehow basically the team was, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this, because I don't want to just like lean on the cliche that he doesn't look like a freshman, because listen, sometimes he does. I mean, sometimes he does, and that's fine. Physically he still had some growing to do, and there were moments when he got a little bit lost defensively, or maybe just kind of went quiet within the offense, and that's all fine. but he never, I guess the best way to put it is he never looked out of place. Physically, he didn't look out of place. Athletically, he didn't look out of place. He didn't, he had some of those demonstrative moments. There was one where he was defending, he was hand fighting with a player down on the block and I think he was trying to armbar him, or maybe he was trying to deny the entry pass. I waved my hand up in the air like I'm denying the entry pass. And they were hand fighting, and eventually the mega player hooked his arm and then intentionally fell over trying to draw a foul, like pulled him down and tried to make it look like Sisley had pushed him down. And the referee saw it and he whistled for an offensive foul, and Sisley got up and he barked something pretty, I don't know exactly what he said, but I think we can all fill in the blank at the kid who had tried to sucker the referee into whistling a foul on Sisley. He doesn't look overwhelmed. He doesn't look, like athletically, he's not the world's most amazing athlete, but I don't think the athletic level of the Big Ten is going to be a huge problem for him. Like he looks like he belongs, basically. And for a true freshman on a team of, again, lots of third, fourth, and fifth year players, that's pretty meaningful. That's I think a really good sign. And I would be surprised, especially given that he's going to have kind of this time to, we know some players are out. Obviously one player still hasn't joined the team, or if he has, it's only been like literally in the last couple of days. That's an opportunity for a freshman to carve out a role, to, sort of plant that seed in his coach's mind. And I think Sisley's doing that. It's hard for me to imagine that he doesn't have some kind of role with this team. I rewind back to that practice, both to talk about Sisley, because that was kind of the first time we really got to see him with this team and sort of in the context of being around, more experienced teammates. It's something that I don't know if it surprised me, but it has stuck with me. That practice was only an hour long. And my understanding is most of his practices don't go a lot longer than that. There is a sharpness and a crispness to kind of the way that DeVries handles everything around his program. And again, that's easier to do with an experienced team, even one that hasn't been together a lot. You have guys who've been attending college practices for 3-4 years. They're going to be able to know how to stay on task and stay focused. And, you're not going to have to walk them through a lot of drills. You're certainly not going to have to do it more than once or twice before they pick it up, because they have that experience. But you can also stay old in college basketball anymore. The portal will allow you to do that. And it just kind of stuck with me. Like there was just a real sort of, we're here, we're about business, we take care of it, and then we keep going. The natural comparison would be Kurt Signetti, because his practices are that way as well. But I do think it says something about a coach, and I think it says something about a culture of a team when you have that ability to be so businesslike on the floor. Guys aren't making mistakes. Guys aren't dragging from drill to drill. There's no sort of sense of passiveness or complacency about, we'll really focus on being good here, but we don't need to worry about this, or, we'll screw around when we're supposed to be doing this, whatever. Like there was none of that. Like it was very sharp. And I think you could see some of that, not all of it. And again, it's really easy to start conflating things that maybe wind up not having as much meaning when we get to the regular season. But I think you could see some of that carry over into the way his teams, played, the way they adjusted to things, the way they, were able to kind of change their approach as those games went on. That was something that stuck with me, even going back to that practice.
Yeah, something that he promised and mentioned in the early interviews and stuff. So good to see that happening truly in practice overall. Two final thoughts, and then we'll let you go, Zach. I would be amiss if I didn't approach one of obviously the biggest narratives or concerns that IU basketball has had going into this is obviously its size. Obviously, we're not sure how IU is going to cover that. We know we got Reed Bailey that's starting in that, and then Sam Alexis coming in on the floor. I think someone posted a while back that Darren DeVries in his last 3 seasons has not been in the top 150 in post-up percentage, whereas IU within that span has in the top 31st. So it's not obviously a big priority in his game plan. But overall, what did you see towards that narrative? Indiana, at least in the mega games, got to see a little bit more size, having that, I'm not even going to attempt his name, that NBA drafted player in there. Did you see Bailey playing well with Sam? Did you see him coming in for each other? What did you see as far as that narrative?
Yeah, so, I mean, it was a problem. I think it was more of a problem defensively. And I think, I mean, like, you know, Indiana ultimately, I mean, I was the one that ran those post-up numbers. No, DeVries is, you know, they did not run a ton of post-ups. And when they did, the offense, you know, frankly, wasn't functioning that well. That's clearly not what it's designed to do. It's a much more sort of motion principle offense, you know, where the ball and bodies are kind of moving in concert to try and find an opening. I think the bigger concern for me, especially because Indiana's going to have bigger guards, you know, I mean, like Tatum Conaway is not small. Lamar Wilkerson's not small. I wouldn't be shocked if once he's healthy, we see Nick Dorn, if he's not starting, at least with a really substantial role. He's not small. He's 6'6", 6'7". The bigger concern, I think, is going to be defensively. You know, Bailey is based on both what I've seen and also just talking to people who knew him from his time at Davidson. He's much more of an offense first big. You know, Alexis is very good defensively. He's a really good rebounder. You know, his profile actually, you know, he had some injury issues and then he kind of just got lost in the rotation too at Florida. But, you know, he was considered one of the better bigs in the portal cycle 2024 when he landed at Florida. And his profile going back to his time, I think it was at Chattanooga, was a real sort of rim protector, shot blocker. And I think he'll be that for this team. But, you know, listen, if we assume that Andre Asimovic is, you know, they're not going to ask too much of him early on, Alexis is the tallest player on the team. And he's probably, at least as things stand right now, the only sort of like, I want to say defense first because he looked good offensively, but really sort of defense focused big. Now, you know, the pack line is designed in part to kind of mitigate these sorts of issues. Like the pack line is designed to sort of make a team better than the sum of its parts defensively. That's its strength. But you've got to pick it up. And again, you know, it's not, even for experienced players, it's not a defense that just comes like that. So I think Indiana's got to, again, keep progressing defensively. I think Indiana is just going to have some trouble this year. I don't, you know, I wouldn't sugarcoat it. I think Indiana there are going to be nights when that lack of size is a problem that Indiana can't fix, that they maybe have to try and, you know, counterweight somewhere else with their shooting or you know, creating turnovers, or I don't know. But there are going to be nights when that lack of size is just a problem, period.
Yeah.
But it's not, this is not me saying Indiana is going to be horrible defensively. I just think they've got to keep progressing in ways that you know, kind of compensate for what they're not going to have, which is, you know, and listen, I know the post-up offense, you know, drove people nuts. I get that. The flip side was having those players was a real defensive advantage. Having Trace Jackson-Davis, Khalil Ware, Umar Ballo, you know, it made Indiana a more difficult team to score on, and at times a more difficult team to create second chances against. This team may not have a presence quite like that, but it's going to play differently anyway. And I think, you know, there are ways that Indiana can compensate for that, I suspect. Maybe not every single night, but enough.
Yeah. Final question for you. Something that we talk about a lot on this show during the season, players that we love, that dog player, that glue guy, the player that the fans really love and get excited about, may not stack the stat sheet. Maybe they do. Obviously, it's been Race Thompson kind of in the past, Anthony Leal this past year. Who do you see, and as you've seen these practices and then this trip, who's going to be that player for IU that fans really attach to, and what have you seen from them so far?
Yeah, I think Connor Enright will be one of those. I mean, he's one of the smallest players on the team, and yet I would use the word feisty based on what I saw in Puerto Rico. I mean, again, he got a technical foul for squaring up that kid who knocked him down. I mean, that, he wasn't it wasn't fake. Like, he was straight into his chest. And that was not kind of the only moment, I think, for Enright. I think, there are a number of them that, frankly, were, diving on the floor and sort of showing that extra effort and things. I think Tatum Connerway has some of that about him too. I think Enright's probably my first answer to that question. I don't think he's the only one. I also wouldn't be shocked if at some point he winds up coming off the bench, if for no reason other than because Indiana's going to need some balance in its guard rotation. I mean, maybe long-term Nick Dorn starts and Enright plays from the bench, but when they were starting Enright and Connerway together, all it took was one of them getting in foul trouble, and it suddenly that guard rotation got really unbalanced. Now, Alexa Ristich will have more time. Obviously, he joined the team basically like right before they left for Puerto Rico, and I thought he looked good. I think there's a lot of promise there. I think he's got the potential to be a pretty good player, but he's still a freshman. He missed the summer. You don't want to ask too much of him, So I think that you're going to need some balance in that guard rotation that might eventually shuffle some roles. But I think Enright is probably my first answer to that question, because he is not afraid to scrap a little bit on the floor. And that's not just like, oh, he plays hard and he defends. Like, he will stick up for himself and his team, and he'll be vocal about it, at least from what we saw in Puerto Rico.
Love to hear it. Love to see it and everything like that. Zach, thank you for being with us. At this point, whenever I have guests on and everything, I always like to kick it to them to kind of promote yourself, tell people where they can find you, and all that. What are you up to?
Yeah, just indystar.com/sports. Zach Ostermann on Twitter, and if anybody's using Blue Sky, I try to post over there too. I probably am not as interactive over there, but I still try to use it. And then we've got a YouTube channel that I think we're going to try and expand out a little bit here I'm not sure. I think we're still developing our strategy on that, but I think that's just my name too, Zachary Ostermann. So, the ever expanding number of ways that we try to bring people content, we appreciate anybody engaging wherever they're comfortable with. And thank you for having me. I appreciate you guys having me on this morning.
And I know things shift quickly to football for you and everything like that. And I have to at least bring this up one minute before we go. Our fan of the show and usurper to Iowa joined in with the question there. Tyler Tackman. Zach, everyone wants to know whether they played Migos pregame. Good old Zach, the crazy guy.
No, they did not. I actually heard Lil Flip for the first time in like 10 years. I didn't know we were still doing Lil Flip. I actually found a couple of songs that I really enjoyed that were like in Spanish. I had to use Shazam to figure them out, but no, it was just like a fun. I mean, honestly, it was just a fun kind of environment. Like there is clearly like a lot of passion for basketball down in Puerto Rico, and like the Bahamas is fun and interesting, but it is a little bit sterile, right? You're in a ballroom, and it's all at the resort and whatever. Like it was especially that game at the Coliseo Roberto Clemente, where a lot of local fans and especially a lot of kids came out. It was just fun to kind of like. It felt like it felt like a really high level AAU game or something, or a, you know, like a really good, like summer league high school game, something like that. And it was just a lot of fun to see, like I said, I mean, I had someone tell me that basketball is more popular down there than baseball right now. And I don't know if that's true or not, but you know, it is clearly like a sport that the island is very passionate about. And I think there was a lot of sort of like community appreciation for the chance to see those games. And it wound up with some fun atmospheres.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks again. We'll try to get you on mid-season and kind of check in on some of these thoughts and how this team is going on. But again, thanks to Zach Ostermann for being with us. And Martha, kick it back to you one last time as we kind of finish up this show. Martha, tell the people, as we're getting into football, one of our technically not sponsored, but sponsors of this program, Hoosier Ticket Project. Tell them about Hoosier Ticket Project, and with football going up, how they can donate tickets to people to see.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chad. Hoosier Ticket Project, 501c3 nonprofit, where we try to remove the financial barrier that exists between fans that want to go to IU games that may not have the means to do so. So we receive donations in two different ways. One, you've got tickets that you can't use, don't want to use, whatever the reason. We will gladly take those off your hand and find a qualified recipient to take those for you, provide that. Whether it's a first-time experience or whether it's somebody taking a child, we'll help find a home for those tickets. We also take monetary donations. We just got done with our Giving Blitz a couple weeks ago. Obviously, with the trajectory of Indiana football and with where they're at and with how tickets are selling, historically, football tickets have never been a problem for us to obtain, whether through donation or needing to purchase them. However, it's a new era, which one we're excited about. Obviously, we love when teams are good because it makes the experience even more valuable, right? So, but it does present some challenges in terms of being able to get tickets, things of that nature. So it's huge this year in terms of being able to receive donations, whether they are tickets or whether they are monetary donations. You can make a donation by visiting our website, HoosierTicketProject.org. There's a donate button, or you can reach out to me individually and I can walk you through that process. But we are ecstatic about the upcoming football season, and basketball, both men's and women's, will be right on its heels. So really, really thrilled about the upcoming athletic seasons.
Yep. And I'm going to kick you one last time. Give me your final thoughts on where we stand with IU basketball, and maybe it's thoughts on something that Zach mentioned to us on the show.
Yeah, I think, I was wondering about the defense, right? And I was glad he spoke a lot about, because the honest truth is, like, a lot of us were just reading through Twitter, right? There weren't many eyes down there. It wasn't streamed. So somebody like Zach is invaluable in terms of getting, firsthand experience and what he saw. So it was huge to have him on and get his perspective. And I think one thing I had questions about was, like, trends in terms of coming out slow against opponents. But he spoke a lot about how some of the downtime was spent and how some of the international rules maybe were a little bit more challenging for Indiana to adjust to. But I think the biggest thing that I took away is that they did adjust, right? It would have been easy in either one of those games to kind of say, man, we're going to take our lumps this game. And that's okay because it's just an exhibition game, but they didn't. And I think that kind of sets the tone for the DeVries era, while we might be a little bit, behind on defense this year, we're still going to come at you. We're still going to punch, and we still have that offensive firepower, and they're not going to back down. And I think everything that Zach spoke about, whether it's going hard for 1 hour of practice and getting the work done, to just everything that DeVries has been about since he's come on board. I think it's this team's not going to give an inch, and they're going to fight. And yeah, there might be games where because of how the roster was constructed, we might be a little bit behind this season. But I don't think that means they're going to be out of any game because of the way they're going to fight and what they bring on the offensive end. So I'm thrilled. I love the balance too. Like, if you look, and granted, we don't know a ton about the opponents, but normally you and I would go player by player by player by player. But if you look at how each player performed over the span of 3 games, there is a ton of balance. And I think that's encouraging as well. So those would probably be my 2 biggest takeaways from kind of what we watched over the last week and then what we heard from Zach.
Yeah, great stuff. I mean, I'm just excited. I'm over the moon. I think it's what I take away out of the numbers and just bigger picture wise is, like you said, the fight that this team has, the tenacity that they have, and then just excited to see them get into Assembly Hall. I think this is going to be a team that's going to be very dangerous at home. It's going to be a team that feeds off that energy really well. You could kind of see it in the highlights and what Zach said, that despite there not being many people there, the bench was still engaged and the guys were still excited, diving on the floor and everything. And that's just feast for a crowd in Assembly Hall to just explode. So we're going to see a very full-throated, very excited Assembly Hall throughout this season. It's going to be very energetic. It's going to be very exciting. There's going to be a lot of good moments with big threes made, big runouts, all that situation, defensive steals, and everything like that. That's just going to make the hall erupt like it can. And so that's very exciting for this team. So excited for the season, excited to get it going. And this is only the start of it. And we've got football to enjoy before we get there as well. But that's going to do it for this edition of Hoosier Morning After. Thank you for joining us on this slightly longer than usual extended period, a little bit later in the day, Hoosier Morning After. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button if you are watching on YouTube. If you're on Twitter, give Martha and I a follow. Martha is at the Mop Lady on Twitter. I am at General Chadwick on Twitter as well. Those of you listening on different podcast platforms and everything like that, if they have a place to review or subscribe, we appreciate that as well if you do that for us as well. We'll be back with you guys again the morning after each game to comment, reflect, and see how things felt for that. But until then, go out there, have yourselves a wonderful day. And as always, let's go Hoosiers.